What if you could take that risk, make that change, reach that goal, live your best life? Welcome to another episode of the What If You Could podcast, where we get together with amazing experts and everyday people who share challenges, encourage healing, and explore the possibilities that life has to offer. I'm your host, Gary Scott, and I'm excited that you're along for the ride. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the What If You Could podcast. And today, my guest, all the way from Philadelphia, go fighting Phils, is Jim Zervanos. Hello, Jim Zervanos.
Hi, how are you?
I am doing good, sir. Maybe we'll tell the story about how this happened later, but I'm just going to go ahead and read your bio real quick, if that's okay, and we'll get cooking.
Okay.
Cool biz. Everybody, we have Jim Zervanos is the author of two memoirs. Your Story Starts Here, A Year on the Brink with Generation Z, and That Time I Got Cancer, a love story. And it has two novels. One's just coming out called American Gyro. I should probably mispresent Gyro, I always do. And Love Park. His award-winning essays and short stories have been published in numerous literary journals, magazines, and anthologies. He is a graduate of MFA program for writers at Warren Wilson College and Bucknell University, where he won the William Bucknell Prize for English and was an academic All-American baseball player. He teaches at a high school in the suburbs of Philadelphia, where he lives with his wife and two sons, and has risen in the baseball pantheon as coach of two little league teams, which may be your greatest achievement yet.
No doubt.
Well, I'm so grateful that you're here. I promise I'll shut up, let you get cooking, but I do have to ask my one question. And so my one question is the what if you could question, or the what if you could podcast. So, Jim Zervanos, do you have a what if you could moment, or what if you could thought you'd love to share with us before we get cooking?
What if I could? Well, for the last couple of years, I've been thinking, what if I could retire? Because the fantasy of retirement, opens up my life to just spending all of my time with my two still young boys, would open up my time to just be able to write all the time and read and do all the things I love to do, which also includes painting in my garage slash studio. And I have no doubt that I would not struggle in retirement. So I finished 30 years last year in this classroom where I'm talking from. So this is year 31. Needless to say, after my exploring the financial realities of retirement, et cetera, and however I would be spending my time to make a few bucks. I've done this a few times throughout my career here, and I circle back, and I only end up feeling all the more grateful for this job that I kind of fell into. It's a great spot. When I fantasize and actually explore other options, I realize that this is a really great gig. I get to teach all seniors in this really nice suburban public school. They're terrific students, and it saved me from law school 30 years ago. I was halfway through Temple Law School, and long story short, because I had to do a few things to make myself an actual candidate that they could hire. Um, but I left halfway through and took a temporary leave of absence, and I loved it. And they hired me that next fall, and I've been here ever since. So that's the what if, and I'd do it if I could, because I know I'd be happy. But I'm happy here.
That's awesome, man. I tell you, I'm a boy dad. My boys are 31 and 30, or no, now they're 32 and 30. They're 16 months apart, so there always the gap there. And I was fortunate I didn't have to be the coach of two little league teams because I they were close enough where I could push them together, right? I'm like, dude, I'll sponsor. I got
Right.
team mom. I'll coach as long as they're on the same team, right? It's so much easier.
Right.
But you had a kind of a forced retirement for a little while there, didn't you?
I did.
You kind of got sidelined on you were on the DL for a little bit.
Well, I thought it might be permanent, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, like permanent, like not
Permanent
retired, but
retirement.
like completely retired.
Yep.
Yeah. That's kind of how we got together. I'm just going to tell it real quick, but the time that time I got cancer, a love story. I just wrapped up with my cancer, and I'm in this bookstore in Philadelphia. I'm visiting my son Zach. Walk in this bookstore, and it's like the dream bookstore for me, right? It's like books everywhere, and it's old and like stacked, and there's no rhyme or reason. I'm like, this place is awesome. I'm like, I'm gonna be here for a while. Someone will get me a coffee. And then boom, smack in my mug was that time I got cancer. And I'm looking at it and going, well, every bunch of people got cancer, right? But then it said a love story. And I'm like, all right, I got to pick this book up. So I did. And that's how we got here. I'm so grateful you got here. But yours was pretty wicked. They were messing with you pretty hard, weren't they?
Yeah. You know, saved my life a couple of times over. First, I want to thank that manager for displaying that book in that bookstore so that you could see it. And I'm glad I went with the title, with the cover that I went with, so that you could see that title, and then the subtitle, which I sort of debated over. But it got you and me to meet, so that's good. The love
What made
story,
you come up with a love story? Cancer is not a love story. We all know that, right?
right? Well, you've read my book, so you know this one's a love story, right? So the way the title "That Time I Got Cancer" came to be was, after a year or so after the whole ordeal, and I had been a writer already, and so life presents this story you didn't ask for. So the inevitable question was, am I going to actually write about this? Um, and as I write about in the memoir itself, like during the whole experience, I was not in a spot mentally, um, to record anything that was going on, which sounds like reluctance, but the flip side of that was that I was having, for lack of a better way to put it, a spiritual experience where, when you're thrust that close to your mortality, and the way I was thrust into it was literally the first experience and exposure to my illness was a moment, literally a moment, where I thought I was going to clot up and fall over. I survived that initial episode and ended up in the ER. And hours later, after the initial scans came through, I was told, the first words out of any doctor's mouth was, "We don't know what this is. It could be fatal." And, she and I were staring at this fuzzy X-ray image of my superior vena cava, the main vein, the last vein that takes the blood back into the heart. And it looked like, an hourglass, and it shouldn't have been a cylinder. Something was in there and it was blocking it, and nobody had the first clue what it could be. Um, Over the course of the next 4 days, one department head after another at the University of Pennsylvania, just about as good a hospital as you could hope to be, um, were mystified. And the only way to figure out what it was to do a biopsy. And that was a catch-22, because as the interventional radiologist insisted, if I poke a needle into this guy's vein, I'm going to poke a hole into it. And then we've got real trouble and likely, the end. So 2 weeks later, to kind of cut to the chase, the cardiovascular surgeon, who was the head of my team, came and sat across from me, and my wife and my parents were in the room, and said, we've done everything that we can. And because I had been thrust into that potential life-ending situation from the very first night I was there, I had been consciously, and by now very much unconsciously, sort of processing the possibility, if not inevitability, of this could be the end. And those were the words that he said, that there was nothing left that they could do, etc. And so in any event, circling back to the question, which I lost track of, which is how did I end up telling the story and calling it "That Time I Got Cancer"? I was not documenting this whole ordeal while it was going on, and that was important to just sort of tell that initial story, because for all the time that I would then survive, and for the next year, that impulse to just be present in my life and to be with the people and to sort of be awake for the life that I was living, all those artistic impulses which drove me, for all of my life ever since I was a little kid, were in my conscious mind, but I wasn't acting on them. I had no interest, or these other interests of just being awake in my life superseded all of those other interests. And that ends up being much of what I wrote about in this book. So a year later, to leap ahead, when I was on the other side of it and decided I want to write about this, or it wasn't even about this. It was, I want to write this. I want to document it. My initial, and maybe this was a rationalization because part of my artistic mind thought, who wants to read this story? It's pure agony. It felt self-indulgent. And so I told myself I need to document it though for my own needs, and sort of record keeping. It was the opposite of anything artistic. And I wrote the first couple of, call them chapters, although I wasn't ready to call them that, and shared them with a writer friend or two. And they both told me, and my first friend, John, told me, like, these are called chapters, Jim. You're a writer. You need to write this story. He was giving me permission to write a book about that time I got cancer. And I needed that. It was that push. So I didn't have to feel self-conscious in the way that I did. And my other friend, Robin, after I hadn't heard from her and I emailed her and I said, hey, still in this sort of self-effacing kind of embarrassed way, I said, have you had a chance to read what I sent you about that time I got cancer? And she wrote back, I think you've got your title. And I never let go of it. And it wasn't until the book was finally going to come out that I thought, I need to kind of wink at the reader and let them know there's something else going on here. And I put that subtitle, A Love Story, in there. So it got your attention. It worked.
It sure did. Honestly, I don't know if I would have picked it up if it just said the time I got cancer. I may have because I'm like,
Amazing.
but I was like, that, like you said, last thing I want to do is read another book about something I just went through. But and so many people now, you completely shifted me because I was going to go somewhere else for a second, but because you brought that up, I have to read this just real quick because this part of the book really kicked me in the nuts right here. There's no time to waste. We live the way I want to live and how I've screwed up. I keep screwing up. As if by now, after the experience I've had, I should be living in a constant state of gratitude and generosity. In those moments of heated awareness, I wanted nothing more than to exorcise all desire and disappointment from my mind and soul. Why can't I get it right? How many brushes with death do I have to have? I thought of the innumerable times of my words and actions had hurt others and the infinite number of times my thoughts had kept me from being truly the person in my life. And you kind of just alluded to that in what you just said. And honestly, that I love the book. I read it twice. I kind of thumbed through it before, before we were going to do this. But that paragraph, Jim, was just
Mm,
there isn't anyone who can't relate, whether you've
mm,
been sick or not,
mm,
with that
mm.
paragraph.
Right. That desire to just sort of achieve and sustain your ideal self. You have glimpses of it, you experience it on occasion, and once you know that, you feel like, why can't I just stay on that frequency? And it's interesting passage. It's really awesome that you picked that because it comes late in the book,
Yeah. Almost the
and
end.
almost the end, and it's kind of a revisiting of that coin, the two sides of the coin, right? That sense of, I'm losing touch with that sense of that bliss state that I had sustained throughout, ironically, the most terrifying time, when I wasn't sure and even at a point believed that it was likely I wouldn't be around for long. And something either kicks in or it doesn't, that you don't want to go down a miserable mess, or you want to be awake for the minutes or seconds or months, God willing, that you might have left. And fortunately, that's kind of where my head was. And then once I got to the other side of that and survived the life-saving surgery and then into the chemo and eventually on the other side of that, it was all very recent in my memory, and I was making it an active practice to try to live that way. So as I got further away from it, and the passage you just read, was a year plus out, and I felt myself, being drawn back into the reality of being a human being and all the worldly things that bring out, the worst in us, but the human in us, the brokenness of us. And I was kind of grieving there, that I understood that it was impossible, unless you were um, Christ himself or a divine being or, you know, Buddha, etc., to sustain that. But it was quite a gift to have had that experience and to at least have that reference point in my mind, and it'll never go away. Uh, and now it's not an abstraction for me. It's not an intellectual concept for me. You know, you don't have to experience it for long. I experienced it for long enough to know that state of mind and to want to be there, to live there, to return there. And I know when I'm off track, and it's most of the time, the great majority of the time.
You're from Philly. Come on.
Exactly.
It is the city
Yeah.
of love, but let's face it,
Yeah.
you guys are tough in Philly.
Absolutely. I mean, we're 12 games up, and I'm nervous about the first round of playoffs here.
Exactly.
When's it all going
Why
to go
aren't they
down?
15 up? Why aren't they
Exactly.
15 up? Like, when are we
Yeah.
going to fire the manager? Um, speaking about sports, you and I both love sports very much, especially baseball, team sports. And
Mhm.
nothing was like the team that you had to build or that you were gifted with for your treatment. I mean, when you read the book, you're like, God, these guys, man. It's like, hey, should we do the stent? No, we shouldn't do the stent. Well, how about the biopsy? Nah, I don't know about that. Should we wait for the chemo? Not wait for the chemo. It's like, dude, someone's got to grab this team by the nuts and get this stuff together, right? But it was such a crazy thing that you had that everyone was trying to be careful, but was also like, we can't wait too long being careful because this guy's got some problems, right? I mean, but it was a pretty amazing team that you had with your dad, who's a doctor, right? I mean, so you had a really amazing team.
Amazing. Amazing. And yet you're pointing to the vulnerability of them. And, one other little layer of the subtitle, A Love Story, is that these guys were this was the Hall of Fame team. This
Yeah.
this was the Robert Plant, Paul McCartney reunion tour that's all over, fake ads in social media. Like, is that really happening? Like,
Could
that
you
was
imagine Robert
right.
Plant?
Yeah.
Bring Led
This
Zeppelin back. Anyways.
exactly. So, but the true beauty and the real art of medicine that these master practitioners gave to me was their vulnerability, their honesty. They didn't know the answer. They needed to confide in me. They needed me to tell them how I felt inside. Uh, they needed to make sure that I was going to be honest with them and tell them, I think I'm in trouble. For example, we ended up avoiding putting a stent in my superior vena cava post surgery when it started to narrow up again due to scarring, right? So I had this surgery by Dr. Alberto Pochettino, who was a heart and lung transplant surgeon who went out of his comfort zone, to put it lightly, and used a material called core matrix, which is made out of pig intestine, an organic material that he used to patch hearts and lungs. So after that earlier scene where I told you that the cardiovascular surgeon said there's nothing left that we can do, about 10 hours later, this surgeon got wind of my case and came in and said, I have a proposition. Cut to the chase, 3 days later, he opens me up, takes out my entire superior vena cava, where this obstruction that we still weren't calling a tumor because they couldn't imagine superior vena cava, replaced it with a tube made out of this core matrix material. In the 11th hour of the surgery, he had on the fly to create a Y, which he didn't expect. He thought it was just going to be the tube. But once he got in there, he saw this black muck, as he called it, which went up into the brachiocephalic veins, which are the other veins that come out of that superior vena cava. And he performed this brilliant surgery. Even on the other side of that, when he came to visit me after the surgery and said, I took out everything that I could see. I think it was benign. I've never seen anything like it. And I think you're going to be fine. And thus the healing began, right? But then with the healing came this scarring that exceeded what he expected. They have this sort of ratio thing where he makes the tube bigger, knowing that it's going to shrink up somewhat. It ended up shrinking much more. And right where that tumor had been that was causing the obstructed blood flow, now it was narrow to a point where we might have to go in there and put a stent in. The radiologist, the interventional radiologist, back to this idea of the vulnerability and the honesty and the conversations with me. What was I willing to do? I mean, even that conversation with the surgeon originally wasn't like, here's what we're going to do. It was, here's an idea I have. What do you think? Well, considering the alternative, doc, I think I'm game, you know, because
Yeah.
we were ready to make funeral plans. Um,
Yeah.
we were literally grieving before that guy went in there. So a couple of weeks later, now we're anticipating chemotherapy, which is another big ordeal. Again, back to the vulnerability and the love story. I'm in a room with these top docs at University of Pennsylvania, and an oncologist is talking to the surgeon right before my eyes and saying, we can't do surgery. I mean, he just had this surgery. I mean, excuse me, we can't do chemotherapy. We just did this surgery. He needs time to heal. Oncologist saying, we can't wait 3 months for him to heal. We need to start the chemotherapy or else we got other problems. They call Core Matrix, the company. How's your product respond to chemotherapy? We don't have any record of our product with chemotherapy. So there was a lot of rolling of the dice, and they involved me in every one of those conversations. When that scarring area became so narrow that I started to swell up again, the normal thing to do would be to put a stent in there. Well, now you'd have a stent for the rest of your life. And that could cause clots and other problems. The preference was, if you can endure the discomfort and we can keep that blood flowing, let's not put a stent in there. But you've got to promise us that you'll let us know if it gets that bad. So these are the kinds of conversations. That's love.
Yeah.
That is a kind of selflessness, a kind of putting aside of ego for these guys that are performing, acts of God on a daily basis, saving lives, etc. Um, and I was profoundly lucky to get these human beings. Not every doctor is like this, needless to say.
No, no, no. You said a key word there. I mean, doctors. There's a movie with Alec Baldwin where he's an attorney, and then someone said to him, "You think you're God?" And he goes, "I am God." It's like, dude, shut up. You're a
Yeah,
freaking attorney. But right, but maybe he was a surgeon. I don't know.
I
But
remember the movie. I remember it.
right, and
Yeah,
so I'll tell you what, doctors are amazing creatures. However, I lost my first wife to cancer. And I went through mine, and honestly, they just go to the shelf, they pull Cancer for Dummies, they go, well, you've got this, they go to that chapter, and they go, okay, we're just going to do this, right? Like, I got the 35/7, right? I got the 35/7, 35 radiation, 7 chemos, because the book said you should have the 35/7.
yeah,
But see, you didn't have that.
right.
No one knew what the hell was going on. And besides that, these guys were willing to set aside their ego and go, we all kind of got to pull together. I mean, the way they interacted together, the way they communicated together with you, you
Yeah.
know, That was spectacular. That was emotional for me because I remember how desperate I wanted that for my wife. It just seemed like, why can't you guys all freaking work together? I mean, why, what is going on here with you guys? But you had that. That is a love story.
Yeah. I was extremely lucky. And I'm so sorry for your loss. Uh, I truly,
Yeah. Well, you were
I
close a couple times, my friend. I mean, there was a couple times. I mean, hell, you couldn't even tie your shoes. I mean, you couldn't bend over to pick up your son. You couldn't tie your
yeah,
shoes. You couldn't, and it just kept getting, tighter and tighter, and the blood flow kept getting worse and worse. And it was like, holy cow,
yeah,
what are we gonna do?
yeah. There's a scene you might recall where I don't name the other hospital I went to, much less the doctor. I changed the doctor's name, but I went to another major hospital. This
Yeah.
was after I was in the healing process, and there was some discussion of putting a stent in there to open me up because I had these symptoms that I was
Wasn't he
told.
an army doctor or something like that? Or he was,
Correct.
yeah, yeah.
And I his office and the experience that I had, you know, felt like we were, in the heat of battle. He brought that intensity to our exchange and a sense of urgency that was rather alarming. He didn't want me to leave that day, uh, and wanted to do emergency, surgery to put a stent in me. And I couldn't wait to get out of there. But there's an exchange there where I haven't said anything of the kind, but his interpretation, or at least the way he kind of told me, was, you think I'm God, I guess, because I was asking him questions that were demanding certain kinds of answers. But his presumption was that I wanted absolute kind of guarantee answers. I was new to him. I don't blame him for not fully appreciating, even though he had the paper record of my story in a folder there. There's a lot missing from the paper record, everything that you and I just talked about, right?
Yeah.
Um, and there were these doctors, across town that I wanted to get back to. And that was my one little sort of dalliance in getting a second opinion. And I scrambled back to my guys
Yeah.
at
See, that's
10.
why when you think about robotics, when you think about some guy in India who is going to use a robot and perform a surgery, right?
Yeah.
There's no way to replace the guy who was messing with your throat. There's just no
Right.
way to replace that doctor because he went in with one plan, and when he opened you up, he's like, "Oh, wow, holy crap, I've got to do something
Right.
else." And only a
Right.
brilliant guy who had done that many surgeries, not like yours, but the
Right.
lung replacement and stuff like that. But I mean, only a brilliant, gifted man could make that
Mhm.
switch on the fly and do that. A robot's not going to do that. Robotics aren't
No,
going to do that. So you
right.
had a really gifted surgeon on your team for sure.
Truly, truly. And here's a guy that did perform uh, an amazing surgery, but had such a tenderness and humility and even sense of humor, the opposite of the other guy who sort of, snapped at me and said, you think I'm God. And I thought, yeah, I'm not the guy in the room that thinks you're God. I think, um, I have no delusions that you're not God. And in fact, I wanted him to sort of acknowledge the ambiguity and the unpredictability of what he was proposing. It was his certainty that that made me feel so uncomfortable about
Yeah.
what I should do right now before you even leave today. So, in any event, in sharp contrast, after the surgery, when Dr. Pocatino came in and told me about how he created that why, and when he had been expecting, he even sort of chuckled and said, "I'm so glad that I didn't snip that piece." Because his original plan, to your point, was that it was going to be 5 inches or whatever, but the piece was 7, but he waited, and almost by accident that he hadn't done that. So when he got in
Hmm.
there, he realized he's going to need the whole piece, and then created that extra, attachment that he needed.
What a gift. So how are you now? What's going on? I mean, How long ago was this? I don't remember. How long ago was it?
2011, 2012. So
So how are you now? I mean, you're completely NED. I mean, you're past the 5 year point. You're past all
right,
that. So
correct.
you look
Yeah,
good. You're healthy.
thanks. I feel great. You don't shake the memory of it, and when anything happens, you not in a pathological way. I think in a an appropriate way, because that narrowing that we've discussed, I still have it,
Yeah.
and so I can't do 10 push-ups without getting a little backed up with blood, right? So it is a reminder, but a welcome one in a twisted way of I'm alive here, and the alternative is right there, and it's sort of a shadowy self, always.
And don't
And
screw it up, Jimmy. Don't
don't
screw
screw it
it
up.
up.
There's that
So,
quote again.
what's the
Yeah,
remember the scan anxiety? You know, you get the scan and you're
yeah.
like, dude, how long are you freaking gonna? I remember there's a part in the book where you're like emailing the chick, like, dude, you said you were gonna tell me at 7, and then you told me you're gonna. I mean, I was so dialed in for
Mm,
anybody who's ever been through that, right? When
right.
you go and you get zapped, you're like, the guy's reading it right now. Why do I have to wait 2 days, 3 days, a
Yeah,
week,
right.
right? That
Right.
scan
Yeah.
anxiety is
Oh my God.
brutal. I mean, do you still have to get any scans? Is there anything specific you got to do for what you
I haven't gotten scans, and after that 5 year mark, I would see my oncologist uh, once a year, and then it kind of faded out. And more recently, I've returned to him. Um, One reason and one recent very drastic change is that I've finally gotten off blood thinners. I've been on Coumadin all these years, and it was proposed. You've been on it for good reason. We needed to make sure you weren't going to clot up through that narrowing, but now you've been on all these years, and nobody wants to be the guy to say, you know what, why don't you let's give it a shot and get off the blood thinners.
right?
And then a week later, I clot up and drop dead. So, but we gave it again. Here's that humility. There's no answer. And it was actually my new primary doctor. And sometimes you need fresh eyes, right? He was the one who said, the first time we met, he questioned it. A year later, we met again for an annual, and he was like, I still question this blood thinners thing. I'm going to defer to your oncologist, but I think we should revisit it. God forbid, car accident, whatever, you get hit in the head with something hard, it's lights out, and then just the question of like, do you even really need to be on it? Because presumably, and this was always sort of the drama of it all after surgery, and even before, when initially they thought maybe you'll be okay, before we realized it was growing in there and it wasn't getting better, that I would form collateral veins, that I would have these new pathways that the venous system would form, to get the blood to the heart. So eventually, after everything, time provided that those pathways to happen. They never really showed up in any obvious way on scans. But classic sort of like scientific deductive reasoning was they have to be in there. There's no other explanation for why
Right.
you're walking around. Like it doesn't make any sense. So I continue to be a mystery, even to the doctors, years later. In
Mm.
fact, this is kind of in the book, but if there were a sequel, I mean, part of what I would get into is, it wouldn't be really interesting, but it's for the interview. For a good year after the end of the book's chronology, I had been told, like, you're pretty much as good as you're going to get. Like, get used to that uncomfortable condition. Uh, as I said, I can't really do push-ups and do anything because I get backed up. But at the time, I couldn't run 10 steps without, that uh, discomfort. Walking got really boring. So a good year after I was well, I started just picking up the pace, and I would push it. I would jog 10 steps and then just be like, and then next time out, I'd push it a little bit more. After a year of doing that, I was jogging 6 miles, which is about
Wow.
as much as I'm even capable of when before I was sick. So that's it. There's no marathon story. End of this story. That's it. But presumably those collaterals just kept pushing and pushing, and I got the blood flow. So,
God, the
it
body's
made,
an incredible, amazing creature. The body is. I mean, you obviously were gifted with some amazing surgeons, but yet, there are some really dark times there, and I want people to read the book, so we're not going to go too much more into that. But there were some really dark times there, and then, dang it, the body just responds, and then it responds again, and then it responds again, and so I'm glad you're here, my friend. I'm glad you're
thank
here.
you very
So
much.
now I want to cover some of the other stuff. I want to get into your brand new book,
Yeah.
but I was curious. I just didn't get time to jump into the second one. But a year on the brink. Your story starts here. A year
Mhm.
on the brink with Generation Z.
Yeah.
What was that about?
Um, High school English teacher, and it takes place in the course of a year. And somewhere around 2016 or so, and not coincidentally, the year of the election of Trump versus Clinton, there was just something in the air culturally that I thought, I've been doing this job for a long time. I've always thought, there are fascinating things to observe and tell about as a teacher, just about teenage life, but never more so than now with this sort of cultural shift that I'm witnessing right before my eyes. The Me Too movement had just sort of exploded onto the scene. Um, Cancel culture wasn't a term, and when I look back at this book and I think of it as being still current, for better and for worse, it's relevant, maybe more so than ever, and all the more interesting to me because we didn't have labels for all this stuff.
Yeah.
It was just at that sort of pivot point. But I saw these girls. I teach all seniors again. So we're talking about, on the brink with generations. They're the ones on the brink, really, of adult life, of a whole new time in America, this sort of cultural turn that I saw them sort of navigating through. The girls struck me as just more tuned in and impressive. I mean, girls, as we all know, mature earlier as teenagers. So that's always been sort of a
Do
general.
guys ever mature? I
Yeah,
don't
right.
think men ever. I don't think dudes ever
Exactly.
mature. So yeah, so
Exactly.
girls definitely mature before we.
Yeah. So never more true than during this particular period. Among the things that just fascinated me, and I just sort of had a hunch, and I trusted the hunch that I would keep a journal of the year because I didn't really know what form this book might take place or if it would end up being a book. It turned out that diary form, this sort of daily entries of a day in the life, ended up being perfect, and the year ended up being rather dramatic and revealing, both on sort of a national level and with the way these kids were responding. There were sadly multiple public school shootings. It was the year that, after sort of the culminating event, the Florida Parkland school, kids from all over, at least the Northeast and from wherever, were taking buses to Washington. And there were kids that were involved in all of that. We were getting into the routine of practicing, shooter drills, et cetera, and all this kind of thing. Um, and again, like I said, cultural things that end, whether it was race stuff or trans stuff and these kinds of themes that were unavoidable in the classroom. And it was a challenge for me to find a way to have appropriate conversations with kids and keep our focus on literature and art, which is sort of a safe space and context to get into these complicated matters. And it just made for great storytelling. And I think it ends up being a book that is quite revealing of our time and still feels rather relevant, maybe more than ever.
What would part two look like 8 years later?
Yeah, well, I guess the short answer to that is, part of writing a book like this is you're concerned that it will become dated sooner rather than later. And right now, I have no impulse, no feeling of there's another story or a sequel that I need to attach to this. I like that I hit on these themes, even the most topical ones that might come off the top of our heads right now, even if we weren't talking about my book, to be able to trace back to passages and parts in this book that touch on those themes, that it's here and it feels more authentic because we hadn't grinded through and had all the conversations that we've been having about every one of these topics for the last 10 years, till we're pulling our hair out and still doing so.
It's been a
And
mad, 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 mad world.
yeah,
That's for
absolutely.
certain. And I know the kids, because like I said, I have a 30-year-old and a 32-year-old,
Right.
and man, a lot of their friends are completely lost
Hmm.
still. They're just not, they're literally not. It's just hard to imagine. I remember myself and my friends at 30, and I know my boys at 30, and
Hmm.
I see a lot of their friends. I'm like, what on earth happened?
Hmm.
It's really kind of a sad, bizarre thing.
It is sad and
Um,
bizarre. Perfect words for it.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
our bar is pretty low. So when you see young people making it and having social lives and jobs, and we're kind of encouraged, and um, I'm encouraged. I have a pretty good outlook given what I see in the young people that I teach. They strike a nice balance. At the time of that book, in the cancer memoir, my first son was a year old. He's now 15, a sophomore in high school. When I wrote the teacher memoir, he was 7, and my younger was 3. 3-year-olds now in 6th grade. So they're still, right in the heart of it, the whole Gen Z thing. But I incorporated them in their younger selves. It wasn't part of my original plan to write about myself as a father to these 7 and 3-year-old young boys. But the parallels, and especially because they were boys, I mean, there was this sort
Yeah.
of gender thing and raising young men and thinking about all these themes about how we raise young men. Quite the big theme these days, right? And even how they voted in the last election. I thought, like, I saw that coming, people. Nobody asked me. I've been watching these boys kind of coming up through high school and seeing how they've been sort of quietly watching these cultural shifts, and they weren't asleep. They've
Yeah.
been awake and they've been watching, and they came out and voted the way they voted, and they're working through stuff. They're trying to find their way, like you just said, lost or whatever. But they're they're gonna land, and we want them to land with their heads straight and with their feet on the ground. And so I've seen a shift, a positive shift with them, with these boys. And as a father of my boys, maybe other parents like me, you know, got a whiff of the the potential challenges these boys are facing, and really kind of double down and are paying attention to make sure that, you know, they got good, strong minds and hearts and confidence, and can still be good, compassionate young men, and find that balance.
Well, there's nothing wrong, in my very humble opinion, having raised boys,
Yeah.
with having strong men and
Yeah.
men that are protectors and providers and loving and caring and sensitive and just good men who have a vision and aren't afraid to speak out their minds because of maybe society telling them that they shouldn't. Um,
Yep.
so I'm happy to hear that because I know that in a lot of places, it's the boys that are struggling for my friends. I mean, all of my son's chick friends are awesome. They're all kicking
Mm.
ass. They're all really
Right.
smart. But it's the guys, it's the
Yeah.
dudes. They're
Mm.
struggling,
Yeah.
and they're being told that they're bad. They're being told this. They're being told that, and they're pretty lost. So I'm excited for the gals. I'm happy for the chicks. I'm having my first granddaughter in about 10 days, 15 days.
Congratulations. Wow.
He's the one in Maryland.
Nice.
But so I'm excited about that. So good,
Great.
good, good, good.
Good.
So
Good.
tell me about the new book. So what's cooking with the new book?
Yeah.
There's a lot of paisanos. There's a lot of Goombas on the front of this book. Can I
Greek
say that? Is
Goombas.
that
Yeah.
bad?
Yeah. The Greek version, but yeah. And the
That's
title, you
right. It's the
pronounced
Greek
it,
version.
to the chagrin of Greeks all over the world when they hear me say gyro, but I'll have to explain because it's a conversation starter. The title is American Gyro, the way I think of it, and of course we could pronounce it the way the Greeks would say the sandwich, etc. Uh,
What
but
is the proper way? I screw it up every time.
gyro,
Gyro.
that's
Okay. Yeah.
yeah,
See, my wife gets it. I don't get it. I
but
say
that's the
gyro.
sandwich, and the title isn't American Gyro because it's not a reference to the sandwich, or at least not the sandwich alone, which is why I don't get to make my cover or choose my cover images. My publisher does a brilliant job of that. But I did say like no gyros, no gyros,
No
no food.
sandwiches. No slices of meat. No, no,
Sure, the diner's fine because that is part of the setting where these boys are growing up. But gyro refers to just sort of the cyclical metaphor of, sure, the literal gyro meat going around like this, but it's the generational return. It's a story of the grandson of a Greek immigrant who came to the U.S. in the early 20th century. You know, the classic American dream story, which was inspired by my own grandfather's actual story, waited tables in New York, made his way in my real life to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where he started a restaurant with a partner, and it grew into a fantastically successful great restaurant. And the gyro or the gyro I incorporated, and this is the fictional part, that my grandfather, in fact, never sold gyros, the gyros. It was more continental cuisine. You know, there's a traditional American restaurant, actually, not really a Greek restaurant. But I took my creative liberties. And Johnny, the main character in my book, kind of comes up in the restaurant. His father died when he was 2, and I incorporated that whole theme from imagining had I died and my own son growing up without a dad, and so not coincidentally, you know, his dad died of cancer, and so his uncle, who has taken over the restaurant, and his grandfather is really a kind of idyllic figure in his life, represents, you know, this great hero who came to New York and has achieved his dreams. He expects that he's going to be sort of following in the restaurant. And his senior year in high school, he kind of by accident, thanks to an inspiring English teacher, gets him to go out for the play, and he loves it, and he's good, and he gets the acting bug, and so he decides secretly that that's what he wants to do, because the news of this would not go over well in his traditional Greek family. So he's sneaking off to New York, and before you know it, he gets a lucky break through a relative, sort of distant relative, who also kind of broke away from his family tradition, to the dismay of everybody. Um, but he follows that path, and everything kind of builds to a point where, you know, it looks like things are going to go well, and he's going to be in this independent movie alongside or across from literally his Hollywood hero. Um, and I won't spoil the ending, but the pressures from home and things come full circle, and he's forced to make some pretty tough decisions. And but it's an American dream story, and it all comes full circle, and he sort of follows the path that his grandfather started almost 100 years earlier.
What's easier to write, the memoir, like the two that you've written, or a full-blown, well, not too much fantasy, a little reality in there,
Mhm.
but a
Mhm.
novel, you know, I
Yeah.
mean, non-fiction, fiction. Which one's easier to put together?
Yeah. Uh, in my personal experience, the memoir was not something that I ever planned to do, as I was describing earlier. The material was provided for me. And so, you know, that cancer memoir, I needed to purge it all. So the process there was just kind of getting it all out. You know, the earliest version of that was at least twice the length of the final version.
Hmm.
And it was it was finding where the book is. You know, as I mentioned, my friend had to kind of give me permission, like, this is a book, Jim. This is a worthwhile subject. You're a good writer. You're going to do something with this material that no one else can do, and you need to do it. So kind of like creating that block of marble. It didn't look like anything, and I needed to chip away at it then and find what the story was and what the book was to make it into, a work of art that was worth other people's time and attention and enjoyment. Different process. With the novels and the fiction that I've written, in a weirdly similar way, the only fiction that I've ever written, and fortunately, up till now, and I'm 56, and whenever I started really digging into all this when in my 20s, I've only written what was already kind of material in me. So whatever fiction, whether it's a short story or a novel, it was already kind of percolating in there and building to a point where I could sort of follow that same model of let's purge all this out, get it out, and then I'll shape it. And some writers just chip away one sentence at a time and find the story. That, for better or worse, has never been me. I've kind of had it in here in this sort of vague way, and I've let it build to a point where I'll get it all out, and then I'll do a lot of
I've
revising.
heard a lot of based on like kind of following up with that, I've heard a lot of writers say, while I'm halfway through my one book,
Hmm.
it kind of already tipped me off to a second book. Like that, like I'm already thinking about that next book because that seed was planted.
Right.
Did you feel that when you're writing the American Gyro book? Is there
The
something going to
American
follow with these guys? Is there a sequel to these guys?
in a really fascinating way to me, um, not something that the earliest version of this novel in my late 20s, early 30s, and it sat there.
Hmm.
The climax of the story took place on the southern tip of Manhattan, and there was this glorious scene with the Twin Towers.
Oh,
And
wow.
then 9/11 happened. That's how long ago the earliest draft of this goes back. I had
Wow.
an agent at the time. She literally she sent out her first round of this novel the first week of September 2001. And then it just like, stop. We're going to, for all of the obvious reasons, but then on an artistic level, like I needed to go back to the drawing board. So that book sat on a shelf. I wrote Love Park, what turned out to be my first novel. Then I got cancer. Gyro still sat there. Then I came back to Gyro when I had a new idea about how I would reapproach it and use my experience. Here I had written a story about a kid who had lost his father, but when I had written it naively in my 20s and 30s, I didn't know anything about real suffering and loss as I would later. And I had actually just kind of killed off the father to get him out of the way for plot purposes. Now I got back to it and I thought, this is really the sort of secret, quiet little beating heart of this whole book. And now I can actually write it. And so I returned to it and I rewrote it through the eyes of a kid that I imagined my own son. It just turned into a completely different book. But it
God,
never
that's
was.
amazing about
Yeah.
the timing of that because it is a completely different book. You ever heard of the book? I think it's called The Angel Within, the story of David.
No.
It's just crazy how that stone had gone from like sculptor to sculptor to sculptor. No
Mm,
one wanted
mm,
this ugly ass stone ever and ever and ever. Then
nice.
Michelangelo saw it and said, "Oh, wait a minute, this is a perfect stone."
That's cool.
And he created the David out of the shitty stone that no one wanted. The scissors was a worthless stone, but he saw the angel within, and like
There you go.
you said, this book,
Right.
had it come out in 2001, would have never been the book that it is
Uh,
today. Just
yeah.
that's amazing. That's a
Yeah.
great story.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
And and
wonderful.
and it never lost that sort of youthful spark. There was definitely a certain quality and charm to that, that I couldn't have written when I rewrote it.
Hmm.
I couldn't have remembered and sort of conjured up that spirit. Back in that period of my life, I had friends in New York. I was going to New York. I had friends who were sort of, young independent filmmakers. Like that was the book that I wrote. And I wanted to write about that and bring that to life. And it was a lot of fun. So it still has that. but now it's sort of through this more mature lens. I made him old, but the earliest version, he was an 18-year-old kid writing about kind of the recent past. In the newer revised version, he's 29 going on 30. Spoiler, you don't realize that until the last chapter, that the whole time he's been looking back through the lens of like a decade out, and then the final turn of the story. Yeah.
I love it. I
Yeah.
love it. I love it. Time flies. You've been so amazing with your time. So I
Thanks.
lied earlier because I'm a
Mm.
Philly fan. You know how we are. I'm an Angel fan. Actually, I'm an Angel fan. My favorite team is the Angels. My second favorite team is whoever's playing the Dodgers. All right. So if you end up playing the Dodgers, you know I'll be wearing this hat. I'll be rocking this hat. But we were just in Philadelphia. We did go to Citizens Bank. Great ballpark, man.
Nice.
Great.
Oh, good.
Love it.
And now the
But I
Phillies are in LA right now, right?
yeah. I just hope
Not
they
to
just
remind
take
you.
the poop
Yeah.
out of the freaking Dodgers. Um, so I lied. I thought I said I had one question, but I actually have two questions. My last question for Jim is if there is a message or a thought or a saying or something you saw in a fortune cookie, if there's something that means something to Jim
Hmm.
that you would like to leave with us before we skedaddle, what would that last thought be that you'd like to share?
I got to go with the closing line of the prologue of the cancer memoir, which were the words that my surgeon said to me when he came into my room after truly it was over. I had hugged my parents. We had resigned ourselves to the end. And I was there to comfort them because I had already done the processing. I was ready for it. They hadn't. My wife and my parents were in that room and we were there alone together. And then 8 hours later, this guy walks in and says, "Here's what I propose." It was that much of a pendulum swing from the end to, and then I'll finish my story in the line, right? Because after he gives me his spiel, the clinical spiel of what he can do, I was still dumbfounded, couldn't believe it. And I said to him, "So there's still hope?" And he just smiled in his humble way and said, "There's always hope." And he meant it. That's what this guy brings, to work every day. And God knows he's seen more suffering and death maybe at his own hands. And these were his words to me.
Yeah, that was a beautiful, moving part because honestly, Jim, I mean, don't we all just want hope? Whether it's for your graduating seniors every year, or it's for your boys, or for your little league team to win the championship, or, your beautiful wife, your family. I mean, don't we just all want hope for the planet, for the people we know? I mean, for him to give you that stitch of hope when you were so deep in the weeds, is such an incredible gift. And the dude came through. I mean, who knew?
That's right, man. That's a really important point because he said it and it's just sort of a sentimental idea. He didn't offer a guarantee,
Yeah,
right? But in that moment, it wasn't that we believed it would happen.
yeah,
This isn't people talk about faith. There's no crystal ball. Hope, faith, they're really close in nature, but however you want to define each, there was no guarantee of the outcome. But in that moment, there was belief and it was a positive feeling and the power of another human being to be there and to offer what he had to offer and to have the confidence to say those words had an incredible effect on me physically, physiologically. It took a beat to really register it and to believe, again, not the outcome, but that there was hope. that there was something to do that might lead to something other than what we had been told was inevitable. And my wife raced out to the hallway, brought my parents back in after that scene that I described, and said, "Repeat what you just said to the surgeon." And he explained, and we were off and running, and I had moments of those kinds of renewed hope, throughout that ordeal. And I do have to remind myself, when I hit a wall or hit a low point, you know, I've been in more hopeless spots before, and you just keep going.
Yeah, man, you sure have. You've almost followed the light. Don't go to the light, but you almost went there, and you're here. You got a second amazing son. You've got it all going on, whether sometimes we feel we do or not. And like I heard someone say the other day, she said her friend would always finish, say, instead of we always say, well, and the rest is history. Well, he would always say, well, the rest is the future.
I love it.
And I'm going to change the rest is history to the rest of the future. So, Jim, you've been wonderful. Where can we get more, Jim? Where can we've got the American Gyro coming out. Where can we find the book? Where can we find more of you and your story?
JimZervanos.com. That's the easiest place to go, and at all the other usual places. And if your bookstore doesn't have it, like that spot in Philadelphia, I was so pleased that they had that book, ask them to order the book.
Loved this place. Go to the Book Trader on Second Street in Philly. The guy working there could care less. He didn't give a shit. But the place
Someone put it in
itself,
the window or where you could
yeah,
see it.
the place itself was on. Jim, thank you so much. Guys, you were just blessed with some time with Jim Zervanos with his upcoming book, American Gyro. Of course, you've got to go get That Time I Got Cancer. Everyone who knows someone or has had cancer, The Time I Got Cancer Love Story is just a wonderful book. You'll just love it, love it, love it, love it. It's so real and it's so impactful. And the new book, American Gyro. Come and get that too. So, Jim, thank you so much, my friend. This has been a lot of fun.
Thanks, Gary. Me too.
Go Phillies, beat Dodgers
Okay.
and Mets. See you, everybody. Thank you. Thanks again for joining us on another episode of What If You Could podcast. Please subscribe, like, share, and give us any feedback. We'd love to hear it. And remember, if you can dream it, you can do it. See you next time.